So thank you very much for tuning in. This is Dr. Sean Yoder, and today we're doing Chapter 10 of Macroeconomics. This is an introduction to money, and we're going to do the money supply process. So I have my caffeinated beverage of choice here, nice hot beverage. Pardon the sip, and we will get going. All right. So, money. Money as an abstraction is anything that fits three main functions. Now, the primary function of money is as a means of payment, although there are other functions that money serves as well. Before we had money, we had to barter for goods, or we had to exchange goods like for like. The problem with this is, unless Starbucks really wants economics lectures, it's kind of hard for me to get my coffee. And for the health and safety of all humanity, it really is best that I get my coffee. The bartering system requires something called the double coincidence of the wants, or double coincidence of the needs, depending on which textbook you read, for it to take place. In order for there to be an exchange, you have to have what I need or want, and I have to have what you need or want. Now, if I want coffee, but I don't have what Starbucks needs, I would have to run around and try to get what I need. So let's say they wanted oranges, so I'd go to the grocery store and try to get oranges. But if I didn't have what the grocer wanted, then I had to go buy that. All this running around time, making all these trades to try to get what you need so that you can make your exchange, that's lost production time. You could be producing or creating value with that instead of just running around trying to conduct a transaction. So notice in this very simplistic way, using money, I give you money, you give me what I want, you take the money, you buy whatever it is you're looking for. The use of money right there improves economic efficiency. We can do more with what we have simply because people are not running around having to deal with this double coincidence of the wants problem. So this is the first use of money. Money is a medium of exchange or means of payment. I go to Starbucks, I give them money, they give me coffee. So for years, people used to ask me, about 3-4 years ago, a lot of students kept asking me, Dr. Yoder, what about Bitcoin? Is Bitcoin going to be money? What about Bitcoin? What about Bitcoin? And my answer was very simple. Until I can buy my coffee in Bitcoin, it's not money to me. Oh, but you can buy it. Most of the transactions that you conduct in Bitcoin are for failed states or black market or something illegal, like ransomware payoffs. Now, you can convert Bitcoin into money, like at the ATM up at Washington Square Mall, but it's not money. Second feature of money is store of value. If you take a bunch of $100 bills and stick it in Bank of the Mattress and come back 5 years later, take it out of Bank of the Mattress, you can buy something with it. You can successfully transfer buying power from today to some point in the future. Money is what's called liquid, meaning you can readily change it for goods and services. Other items serve the store of value function, like a gold bar, a rare painting. There are all kinds of things that can transfer buying power into the future. The problem with it is they're not liquid, or to put it more politely, I can't buy my cup of coffee with a gold bar. And herein is a trade-off. Cash, if I take a $100 bill, stick it in Bank of the Mattress, because of inflation in 5 years, I can buy fewer goods and services with that same $100 bill than I can today due to inflation. However, I don't have to pay a transaction charge to convert my cash into something that they will accept. If I put a gold bar in Bank of the Mattress, I will lose less from inflation. I'll be able to buy more goods and services than I would if I held in cash. However, I have to pay a transaction fee to convert my gold bar into cash. So this inflation versus liquidity trade-off really becomes a problem, and you have to figure out where in that trade-off do you want to be. And a lot of times it has to do with how long you're trying to transfer money and how much money. If you're doing $10,000 for a year, probably not worth doing the gold bar thing. If you're doing $10,000 for 10 years, it may be worth converting to gold and then back. So there's a lot of different things in consideration when we talk about a store value. The last is a unit of account. Now, how do I put this poorly? I've been banned from going grocery shopping in my family. When I go grocery shopping, I take my Texas Instruments calculator with me. You know when you go to the grocery store and they have the price tag for all these different things, and then they try to make it so that you can do comparison value, and they try to give you a price per unit on the price tag. But to the keen eye, you realize after one quick glance at it that they don't use the same units on their price per unit. Some are priced per pints, some are priced per fluid ounce, some are priced per quart, price per package, price per, and it goes on and on and on. So I'm the guy who sits there with my TI running conversions on all these different price per units to try to figure out which can of soup will save me a few pennies in the process. By the way, the toilet paper is totally the worst. Some are price per sheet, price per square inch, price per roll, price, and then you got to do the 1-ply versus 2-ply. Oh my goodness. Oh, toilet paper is by far the worst to try to standardize. But notice, in that moment, as Professor Yoder's standing at the great, I mean, you could see this big, round professor standing there with his TI, big, thick Coke bottle glasses, staring at his calculator, click, 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 In that moment, I am using money. Now, I'm not handling money. I'm not conducting a transaction. But I'm using money as a means of comparing value and deciding what is the opportunity cost of this. So I'm using money in the abstract. And so money can be used as a unit of account, trying to help you compare value. In the 19th century, these birds used to be used as money. Feathers of these birds were killed and put in these nice long rolls to quote-unquote make money. You can use almost anything. Generally speaking, you don't want anything perishable or too heavy or too easily acquired. So sand obviously doesn't work that well because it's too common in some places. Blueberries don't work that well because, it rots. same idea. So there are different types of money. Commodity monies is an item that has some intrinsic value. Now, this could have been the cigarettes back in prisons in World War II. This is a gold coin. These are 8 reals, Spanish reals. And back when they did pieces of 8, they would literally take the coins and break them into 1/8, and that would be 1 piece of 8. But that is a commodity money. The next step from a commodity money are these. Now, this looks like a dollar bill. It's not. This is a silver certificate. Silver certificate, right here. And what this is, if you take this to the Federal Reserve Bank, any Federal Reserve Bank, the closest is, for us is San Francisco, and you present them this, they have to pay you $1 worth of silver. So you're actually trading silver when you're exchanging this. If you ever get one of these in your change, say that they trade on eBay for $30, $40 last I looked. So they're a collector's item. But these are silver certificates. So you're actually trading silver here. So that's commodity money. The money we have today is fiat money. Is worth it. It's worth something because the government says it is. Now, fiat money is not a backed money. Now, let's have a conversation for a second. We need to have there's something going on in the U.S. government and in U.S. politics that you need to know about for money. The United States used to be backed by gold. We got off the gold standard. Why did we get off the gold standard? Because you have to have gold to increase or decrease the money supply. Well, that's good, isn't it? Yeah, but what happens if another country hoards the world's gold supply? Or what happens if they dump a ton of gold into the United States? They could theoretically conduct economic warfare against the United States, and there's nothing you could do about it if you're on the gold standard. Or literally you could do that. Very simple. With a fiat money, you get a tool that comes with fiat money, and it's called monetary policy. You can use monetary policy to increase or decrease the money supply to help smooth out recessions and expansions if you so choose. But herein is the argument. If you trust the central bankers, if you believe the central bankers are technocrats, really have the best interests of the people at heart, really are doing their job, and have a good central bank, monetary policy is an amazing tool. It helped immeasurably in the Great Recession. But if you have a corrupt central bank that's using monetary policy just to keep some political officials in power or for their own enrichment, then you might have issues. Now, if you increase the money supply too quickly and too much, if you just run the printing press, you'll get currency debasement, and that will trigger the hyperinflation that you saw back in Zimbabwe. Remember that Zimbabwe note I showed you back in Chapter 5? The $100 trillion note. So what happened? The government couldn't pay its debts. The central bank said, not a problem. We'll just print up some money. Printed up some money, gave it to the government, and the government paid its bonds. But they kept doing it over and over and over. And eventually, the Zimbabwean dollar wasn't worth anything on the international exchange markets. Why? Because they just printed it whenever they liked, willy-nilly. Hence, Milton Friedman, Nobel laureate. University of Chicago. Inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. Always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. So how do we measure money? Well, the first way you measure money is with M1. These are stock measures, so you measure this at a point in time. So what counts in M1? Currency held outside the bank. So Jorge Washington in your wallet counts in M1. Jorge Washington. I'm still looking forward to the Tubmans. I hope the new administration gets on making this Tubmans. That would have been cool. They're going to change. They were going to move President Jackson to the back of the $20 bill and put Harriet Tubman on the front. But the Trump administration put that on hold. There's some hope that that's going to go back forward soon. Okay. Currency held outside the banks. Demand deposits. Demand deposits is an old school banking word that means checking accounts. Okay, so your checking accounts. Traveler's checks. Traveler's checks are special checks that you used to get literally in the name of traveling. That would be a guaranteed check because a lot of places would not take checks from out of state or out of the country. Traveler's checks are great. You can go to your most banks and ask them. Sometimes they'll charge you a fee for them. Sometimes they're free. You buy a pack of them. If you're interested more in this, let me know. I'll explain it to you. With traveler's checks, and then other checkable deposits, think cashier's checks, these kind of things. So at the end of March of 2018, it was $3.6 trillion. Okay. What's the 800-pound gorilla not included? Think about yourself, where you keep your cash. I keep my cash in my wallet, in my checking account. I don't have a ton of traveler's checks unless I travel. But I also have a savings account. Notice M1 does not have a savings account. M2 does. So here's the second way of measuring, M2. If it's in M1, it's by definition M2. M2 automatically includes everything in M1, but it also includes your savings accounts. Then it includes something called a money market account. So about 3-4 years ago, my checking account was hacked. I get text notifications whenever an authorization goes, and I saw something and go, what is this? And lo and behold, somebody had gotten into the account and was draining it in it. So we put a stop to it. But whenever that happens, you can't leave that account open. You really should close the account. If you want a new account at that bank, that's up to you, but you need to nix that account with something else. So my account is a money market account. I can write checks just like you can. I have a debit card just like you. I have automatic bill pay just like you. But my money, my cash, makes short-term loans unless I get a little bit better interest. Now, my account is not FDIC insured. However, I can buy stocks, bonds, and a bunch of other things directly from my account. Other near monies, this is small dollar values, certificates of deposits, other things of that sort. If you're interested in that, let me know. We can talk about that. But notice M2 at the end of March 2018 was almost 14 trillion. Go back to M1, 3.6 trillion to 14. This is huge. Professor Yoder, why do we have two measures of money? Well, there's actually more than M1 and M2. I'm only requiring you to know M1 and M2. But M1 is the strictest definition of money. But it bounces all over the place. And it's hard to use for policy purposes. M2 is sometimes less volatile and easier to understand what's going on. And you tend not to get a fake signal about the money supply. Let me give you an example. In 2008, during the Great Recession, right, a lot of people lost their jobs. Now, if you had a job and you were a dutiful saver, you saved the amount that you're supposed to, and you did everything you were supposed to, and you lost your job. You have your money in savings. When your home mortgage or your rent or your car payment came up, what do? You transfer the money from your savings to your checking, and you pay your bill. So what would happen in M1? Savings is not an M1, but your checking is. So that would be seen, transferring money from your savings to your checking would be seen as an increase in the money supply. It would look like the money supply of the United States is going up. But if you're using M2, M1 is going up from checking, but savings is going down the exact same amount. So transferring money from savings to checking to pay your rent or to pay car payment doesn't move M2, but it does M1. So if you're looking at what is the central bank doing with the money supply? Is the money supply actually growing or not? Professional economists like to use M2. There's M3 that includes available credit and other things. In the end, professional economists pick the definition that best meets their needs, but I generally always use M2. All right. So now we're going to start working on how money supply works. Now, there are two parts to the money supply process that we have left to do in this lecture. The first is the banks. Banks have a role in creating money. And this goes back to the 15th and 16th centuries. This goes way back. But you can even see it in the Old West during the California Gold Rush and some of these others. So back in the day, during the gold rushes, if you happen to find gold, congratulations. But gold is big and heavy, and it's kind of inconvenient to carry gold around with you everywhere. And the problem with carrying your gold around everywhere is someone like one of my ancestors. I am descended from the James clan, good old Jesse and Frank James. They would like to encourage you to contribute to their retirement fund at gunpoint, of course. Right? So if you're carrying around large quantities of gold, you would also need a small army to help protect you. And then everybody who had it would also need small armies, and this was a pain. Hence a bank. So what they did is they went and they deposited and lodged their gold in a bank. The bank kept it in a vault, hired one army. Instead of everybody having an army, the bank had an army to guard the vault, and they would give you a slip, and that slip was 100% backed by gold. But people didn't like going to the bank to take out the gold to pay for things, so they just exchanged the slips. And herein was a problem. Because people were exchanging slips instead of going and drawing down the gold for deposit slips. The gold in the vault goes up and up and up and up. Now, just stop for a second and think. What happens to the probability that the bank gets robbed as the vault gets fuller and fuller and fuller? Yeah, you got it. The more gold in the vault, the more likely it is you get robbed. An old bank robber a long time ago was interviewed and asked why he robbed banks. Bank robber, true to form, said, because that's where the money is. Not to overthink it, right? So the bank had a problem. People were finding more gold, bringing the gold back, but the probability of them getting robbed kept going up. So what banks realized is because people weren't coming to get the gold out, they were just trading the slips, they could make loans and lower the amount of gold in the bank by lending some of the gold and brought it back down. Cool. So they made some loans. Now, Notice what happens. If everybody who had a claim for gold suddenly came at the same time, the bank wouldn't have enough gold to pay everybody. That's a problem. But as long as that doesn't happen, the system keeps rolling. But if too many people come at the same time, you get a run on a bank. And then usually the bank fails. But Professor Yoder, runs on the banks don't happen anymore, do they? This is the Bank of Northern Rock in the United Kingdom. And these fine people, a few thousand of your closest friends, have taken off work to come to the bank to get their money because they heard that Northern Rock Bank may have invested the money in something called subprime mortgages. And they weren't really that interested in letting Northern Rock have their money anymore. And Northern Rock didn't open that day. In the United States, we tend to kneecap banks before this happens. Anybody remember WAMU, Washington Mutual? Yeah. Wachovia? Yeah. Whole lot of banks went away because this was about to happen. So today, bankers are required to hold a certain amount of money on reserve to pay depositors. This is called the required reserve ratio. It's a legal requirement. All right. Assets minus liability. 3 bars here means it's defined as. In economics, it means you can't argue about it. If it's 2 bar, if it's a double equal sign, 2 bar, you're allowed to fight. If it's 3 bar, it means it's true by definition. You can't fight about it. So assets is defined as equal to your liabilities and your net worth. So on a bank balance sheet, this has to hold. Now, the Federal Reserve and Central Bank, the Fed, is the central bank of the United States. This Bank of Japan is the central bank of Japan. Bank of England is the central bank of the United Kingdom. European Central Bank, etc. So they all have different terms. Now, liabilities, the most important of the liabilities are its deposits. When you go and deposit money in the bank, that bank owes you the money. It is a liability for the bank. They owe you the money back. The net worth is the value of the firm to its stockholders or its owners. So I want you to understand right here, look at this, net worth. If the stock value of a bank suddenly plummets, it can have implications for the entire balance sheet. So reserves are the cash in the vault plus what they have on deposit at the Federal Reserve. So here we go. Notice these two, assets and liabilities plus net worth, have got to equal. These two always equal. Now deposits, up here, this is what it owes you and me. Reserves, the required reserves are a fraction of deposits, not the total. So if there were no extra reserves, we would take 20 divided by 100 and say, the reserve ratio, the required reserve ratio here is 20%. Now, whatever's left over, they can make in loans. So 20, in this case, $1 million, they were allowed to make $90 million, that's 110. Make sure you grasp that. Reserves are a function of deposits and not the total. Now, banks sometimes hold excess reserves. So what they're actually holding minus what's required. They love to hold excess reserves because if a loan goes bad or something goes wrong, they have reserves to absorb it rather than causing issues later. For those of you who go on to my money and banking class, that I'll teach you a lot about excess reserves, and we can go on there. So I'm going to tell you a story here in a minute. We're going to start with a clean bank. I'm going to put $100 in, and by the time we're done, that $100 is going to magically turn into $500. So here's how we go. We're going to start up here. Bank one. I'm going to take $100. I'm going to lodge it in the bank, into my account. So they owe me $100, and that $100 they put in the vault. So reserves have $100. Okay, so that's right here. Now, you bank at the same bank I do. Good choice. And you decided you wanted to get a loan to get something nice for your mom for Christmas. Now, the reserve ratio is 20% in this example. So the bank has to hold 20% of my deposit in the vault. That's $20. So they could only make a loan for $80. So they issue you a loan for $80, and they put that $80 in your account. So my account has $100 in it. Your account has $80 in it. There's $100 in the vault, and you owe them $80 for your loan. You then write the check. When you write the check, and the check gets cashed, $80 comes out of your account, and they take the money out of the vault, you're in reserves, to pay the bank. So notice we're still at 100 in the bank. Now, when you write that check, the store deposits that check. So here we go, $80. Someone else wants a loan as well, but they can't lend out all 80. They can only lend out 20% of that, or excuse me, 80% of that, which is $64. Same story. There's a loan of 64. Whoever's second account has the 64 in it. They write the check gets cashed, and here we go to bank three. Now, this is a decaying series. It's a convergent, we call it a convergent geometric series. And when it's all said and done, getting smaller and smaller each time, you end up with $500 total in deposits and a total amount of loans of $400. Banks can create money in the system by making loans. This is called the money multiplier process, which is defined as 1 over the reserve ratio. Now, this is 3 bar, you're not allowed to fight about it. In practice, guys, it's the actual reserve ratio, not just the required reserve ratio. 1 divided by the reserve ratio. So what was the reserve ratio in this example we did back here? 20%. So 1 divided by 20% is the same as 10 divided by 2 or 5. So what happened? I put $100 into the system, money multiplier times 5, and that $100 hits the money multiplier and becomes $500 in total deposits. So the money supply increased by a factor of 5. So what is the reserve ratio? Well, it depends on how much money the bank has, but if it's more than 124 million, which is most banks, it's about 10%. So the Federal Reserve System, Central Bank of the United States, founded in 1913, and was reformed in the 30s after the Great Depression, is the Central Bank of the United States. Now, the Federal Reserve System, in a very American way, is meant to have all the stakeholders represented and balance of powers, and it has a pretty good distrust of government, in that it is an independent agency. It does not take orders from the president or from Congress, although the independence of the Fed has never been fully tested. So each of the regions of the Federal Reserve, back in 1913, these areas were meant to be similar. So you have Region 1 in New England, here's the New York Fed, here's the Philly Fed, there's a Mid-Atlantic Fed out of Richmond, the Atlanta Fed. And back in 1914, Hawaii, Alaska, we were just junked together as the West, because clearly the Hawaiian economy and the Utah economy are totally similar, right? Okay. So you have 12 regional banks. Now, a bank in Oregon can choose to be a part, many banks can choose to be a part of the Fed. It depends on whether you're federally or state chartered. But if you are, you get to vote for the directors of your Federal Reserve Bank president. Our bank is out of San Francisco. If you have a $1 bill, it will tell you by number and on the seal which Fed printed that, which bank. The most important part of the Fed is this, the Open Market Committee. These are the people that decide to increase or decrease the money supply. Now, there are 7 governors with 14-year terms that are appointed by the president and Senate confirmed. So there are 7 governors, 14 years terms. Why 7 governors, 14-year terms? The idea is a governorship comes up every 2 years. So if you have a president who serves for 8 years, at the end of 8 years, they've at most appointed 4 governors. So they're just barely getting a majority of the Board of Governors. The idea here is each deal with a Board of Governors left to them by their predecessors. It's meant to have institutional memory and not be very reactive for political reasons. So all the governors vote, so there's 7 votes here, okay? And then 4 on a rotating basis, well, a total of 5 of these Federal Reserve Bank presidents vote. Now, New York always votes. More on that in a minute. And then of the remaining 11 regions, 4 of the 11, the vote rotates. Now, all 12 presidents are in the room, bank presidents are in the room, but only 4 have a vote. Why is the New York Fed special? Well, it's the only Federal Reserve Bank that's a member of the Bank of International Settlements. So it's the one that has to deal with the rest of the world. So it has a unique perspective. And it is where the open market desk is for carrying out monetary policy. So the New York Fed always has a vote. So the Open Market Committee will meet and decide, do we want to increase or decrease the money supply? And then they pick up the phone. They say, make it happen. New York calls the Open Market Desk, and the Open Market Desk makes it happen. And they increase or decrease the money supply. How does that work? What the boys in New York at the Open Market Desk do, if they want to increase the money supply, they go around and they say, we're interested in buying a treasury bond. Do you have a treasury bond? Oh, you do? Great. Tell you what, your bond pays $1,000 in 10 years. I'll give you $1,000 for it now. Would you take that? Sure. All right, awesome. They write the check for $1,000 and give it to the person, and they take the bond. The Federal Reserve takes the bond. Now, that check for $1,000 from the Federal Reserve is like they printed the money, picked. A check from the Federal Reserve is always good. They have the bottomless checking account. So the person who gets the check from the Fed, they deposit it in their account and start the money multiplier process that we just went through. And around it goes until the money supply is increased. The inverse is also true. Hey, I have this bond. Is anybody willing to buy it from me? Oh, you will? You'll give me some money? Okay, great. Write me a check for it. They write the check. Take the check and withdraws and gives whoever bought the bond the bond. By withdrawing the money, it gets deposited into the Fed's bottomless checking account, so the money disappears. And the money multiplier works in reverse. Oh, that's right. The money multiplier giveth, the money multiplier taketh away. It does go in reverse. Now, this buying and selling bonds is called open market operations. And this is the primary tool the Federal Reserve uses to control the money supply on a day-to-day basis. Yeah, we got that. Yeah, all right. So open market operations is the #1 tool. They could change the reserve requirement ratio. That doesn't, but they could. If you change the reserve ratio, you're going to change the money multiplier. But why don't they? #1, it's a blunt tool. If you change the reserve ratio, it's massive across. It also takes 2 weeks or more for all of that to take effect in the economy. And the Fed usually, if they want something done, they want it done faster than 2 weeks. Now, the Chinese use changing the reserve ratio all the time. That's the big thing. Chinese do that. The last thing the Fed can do is they can change what's called the discount rate. Now, the discount rate is a rate that banks pay to borrow money from the Fed, usually through the discount rate, but most banks don't like doing that. Most banks do not like using the discount window at all, because if you use the discount window, that's usually a sign that you're in trouble. So primary role is to control the money supply. Make sure it doesn't get too big or too little. But that's not its only job. They clear checks. So if you have a check, once you take out your checkbook, look in, let me go grab my checkbook. Where'd my checkbook go? Oh, here it is. So I'm going to look at my checks right while I'm telling you. If you open up your check and look in the top right, you'll see a set of numbers. A number dash another number divided by another set of numbers. What those numbers in the top right are, is that's your bank's account number and which Federal Reserve Bank they're a member of. So that if needed, that check could be cleared through the Federal Reserve. Most checks use American Banking Association, the routing numbers underneath it, but you can use the Fed like we did back in the old days to clear checks. But the Fed also, the key thing for the Fed is this: assist banks that are in trouble. Let's be clear. If you're a bank and you're in trouble, you're going to get kneecapped. Okay, the regulators are going to take you out. You're going to be out of business. But you can go to the Federal Reserve and get an emergency loan. You can get an emergency loan from the discount window. If nobody else will lend to you as a bank, you can always go to the Fed. Now, understand, you do it and you're gone. But you're gone anyway, so there you go. And then the Federal Reserve is also responsible for managing exchange rates and foreign exchange reserves. We do keep a bunch of foreign exchange. We keep pounds, euros, and other currencies for emergencies in case something goes awry, weak and early. Now, after 2008, the normal tools in the Great Recession didn't work, and we ended up with what are called extraordinary measures. Some of them are still in place, some of them are not. For example, the Federal Reserve began buying not just treasuries, but some mortgage-backed securities from the GSEs. And then they started buying larger mortgages. And by the time we were done of quantitative easing, the majority of mortgages in the United States were actually held by the Federal Reserve. There are other tools. They pay some small interest on reserves. They also can jawbone a bit with something called forward guidance. Some of these tools are being wound down. Some of them are active today. Also, the Fed has created new tools in the wake of COVID. So the COVID-19. I'm not testing on the new tools. The tools I expect you to know and that are going to be on your exam are the three in the original. Open market operations, the reserve ratio, and the discount rate. Those are the three you're responsible for. Lender of last resort. If you are in trouble, you can always go back to the Fed. So this is Fed's balance sheet as of April 2018. Gold, this is just some small, this isn't very large at all. But look at this mortgage-backed securities, $1.7 trillion in mortgages. 2.4 trillion of the US government debt in treasuries. So I grabbed this from my money and banking class, and I just wanted you to see. Here's 2008, traditional security, these are treasuries. This is direct lending. But notice what happened after the Great Recession. Here's mortgage-backed securities and agencies from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. There you go. Direct lending, they got out of this business and they don't really like doing this. Here's long-term treasury. Usually the Fed likes to do short run, 3 months, 6 months. This is 10-year, 30-year treasuries, the long end of the curve. So I want you to grasp from this photo how completely different world we live in now than we did before the Great Recession. The role of the Federal Reserve has changed. Usually they were on the short end of the yield curve, 3, 6 months up to a year. Now they're definitely playing in the long end of the curve. So this also came from money and banking, and I wanted you to grasp this. A lot of people say the Federal Reserve controls the interest rates. No, Federal Reserve does not control interest rates. The Federal Reserve tries to do something, but how do they do it? They can control money supply, or short-term and long-term interest rates are targets. But what can they control? They can control this. They control what they pay in interest rates on the reserves, but that's different than what you and I pay. Here's what they can do. Open market operations. Discount policy, how much they give to banks in distress. Reserve requirements, we've already talked about that. Interests on deposits at the Fed, they could increase the interest there. Large-scale asset purchases, these are those mortgage bonds I showed you. Forward guidance is jawboning the market and issuing press statements. What does it change? Reserve aggregates and short-term Fed funds rate, which is meaningless. None of us pay the Fed funds rate. But what do these change? The monetary aggregates and the short-term interest rates, and eventually get there. So people who say the Federal Reserve controls the interest rates. No, they don't control interest rates directly. The only interest rate they control directly is the interest on reserves. That's it. And nobody here pays those interest rates. Now, they may target an interest rate, which they do. But there's a big difference between being the target of something and being controlled by it. Okay, so that's the money supply side. Next time we meet, we're going to do money demand, and we're going to do money market equilibrium, and we're going to talk about that. Now, in your 13th edition of your textbook, That's been collapsed into Chapter 10, but I didn't find the money demand section in Chapter 10 very good. So I'm going to, back in the 11th edition, they had a better version of it, so I'm going to lecture out of that. Be sure to get the slides for the money demand lecture. There is a separate money demand homework in my econ lab that I expect you to be going through. That money demand homework, I know there's a lot of questions. They're not brutal. It doesn't take a ton of time. Go ahead and plow them out. You'll be glad you did. So thank you very much for coming. I appreciate your time. I'll be getting money demand up shortly. Take care now.